Can you just create a quick training on? That is the start of a question that makes every L&D pro die a little inside, right? And in this episode, we're going to help you overcome that. I'm joined by the brilliant Heather Burright to talk about something way more powerful than content: trust. We get into the real work of L&D, the behind the scenes stuff that nobody sees, like building credibility with stakeholders, asking the right questions, not just ticking boxes, pushing back without burning bridges, and making sure what we build actually solves the right problems. This episode is for anyone tired of being a content vending machine, because when we build trust, we earn influence, and that's how we drive real change. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. It's another week of our People Impact Loop series, and I've got another wonderful guest with me today. Today I am joined by Heather Burright. Heather, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And of course, I feel like I see your content on LinkedIn all the time, so I'm sure many of our listeners do as well. But for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I am learning and development consultant. I do instructional design work. I do leadership development work and leadership competency models as well, but more from the learning perspective, right, than some of the HR side of things.
Yeah.
I have been working with nonprofits for the past 5 years in my consulting business, and I worked for a national nonprofit in the U.S. prior to that, and then had a stint outside of nonprofit as well. And I kind of use all of those experiences as I'm working now with organizations to help them with their learning and development needs.
I absolutely love that. And I love what you do. I love your podcast. You've got your own podcast as well. I'm always listening in. And as you know, I do share your podcast as part of the resources when I'm saying how L&Ders can really upskill on marketing thinking. So I think we're going to have a great chat today. And what we really want to talk about today is identifying the root problem when it comes to learning and development, because all too often we just create content for content's sake, don't we? We think, oh, we know how to solve this problem, we need to create a piece of learning, rather than asking those questions to dig a little deeper, to do a bit of deeper understanding into what's actually going on in the business. And like you said, you work with a lot of not-profits, but you also have a real breadth of experience in doing exactly this as an L&D consultant. So I think we should probably start with the why. Why does this keep happening? Why do people keep essentially solving for the wrong problems within L&D?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do feel like we create the expectation, right, is that we create a lot of content, and content doesn't necessarily create change. I talk a lot about change when I'm on LinkedIn or on my podcast and things like that. People don't change out of their context. So we can't just send them to training, send them through content, even if it's really good, and send them back to their environment and then expect them to change. Because once they're back in that environment, they're going to be using the same systems and the same processes. They're going to be interacting with the same peers who weren't necessarily trained with them. They're reporting to the same supervisor who may have no idea what they were trained on. And they go back to the way things were. And
Yeah.
this is what happens so often in our organizations. So that to me is the biggest challenge when we're just creating content. But to your point, we have to really get to that root cause. We have to understand their needs and the context in which those needs exist. A few of the questions that I personally like to ask, and it's not a template. I don't ask the exact same questions every single time, but the questions I like to ask to get to kind of those root cause issues, like first, what do you need them to do, right? We want to focus the behavior, the skill, the thing, rather than the knowledge. And then how is that different than what they're doing now? Because again, we want to see what is that actual change going to look like? In what situations would they do those things? Starting to get to some of that context. What would motivate them to do that? Are they experiencing pain points now that this new behavior is going to help them kind of alleviate? Or is there something else that would motivate them to do it? And then what's going to prevent them or make it harder for them to do it? Again, we're thinking systems, processes, there are all of these other things that
Yeah.
might impact their ability to make that change. But when we take the time to to ask questions like these and to uncover not just what that skill gap is, but also that context in which they're operating, that's going to lead us to those root cause issues and allow us to solve for their real pain points and then create solutions that actually create change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all too often as well, we think about that context to an extent, but afterwards, we create the learning, we create whatever it is, whether it's an e learning module, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a program, we create that thing and then we think, oh, why would they care about this?
Yeah.
What's in it for them? What are their blockers going to be? Will their managers be on board? We don't think about that, and we being like L&D as an industry, we don't seem to think of that at the start. And I think that's quite detrimental to helping us actually uncover the real problem and also getting it right when we do develop.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times, and I don't know if it's because time is limited or our capacity, or if it's just our ability to reach our audience, even sometimes. I think a lot of times we just ask our subject matter experts and our stakeholders what they think, and then we start building. And there's merit in that. Our subject matter experts, our stakeholders, they have good insights, but it's not always that whole picture. And
Yeah.
I think asking those questions, getting to know your audience, we have to use that to get to the root of the issue and know what those friction points are and help kind of fill in that context for us so that we can design for all of those things. But it does require us to approach our partners differently because we have to get buy-in, right, for doing things differently. And that's hard because we need their buy-in to spend time with our audience or to create something that doesn't look just like all of the other content that exists. And that requires a good relationship with the people that we're working with.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges when I'm working with L&D teams that I see them come to me with. It's saying, oh, well, I'd love to do this, but people come to me and say, hey, I want an e-learning course on leadership. You go do. And they don't have that confidence or the relationship to turn around and say, actually, let me ask you a few questions about this.
Yeah.
And I know we're both going to say business partnering and how that's so important. But I'm starting to realise that the phrase business partner is kind of bounded about a lot. And not a lot of people seem to know what it really means. What it really means to be a true business partner. I know some people have it in their job titles, like L&D business partner.
Yeah.
And I think actually not understanding what we need to know as a business partner, what we need to do, how we build that trust, not understanding what that is actually to a detriment of us actually finding out the root causes and the real issues that our employees, our learners, I hate the word learner, but our learners are having in their day job. I think the lack of understanding about what business partnering is causing that problem. Don't you agree?
I agree. Yeah.
And I know that I share your podcast quite a lot about business partnering. So for anybody listening to this thinking, so, all right, Han, what is business partnering?
Yeah.
What is business partnering to you?
Yeah. I think it means that we're doing what's right, even when it's not popular. And don't get me wrong, I do compromise. I think compromise is an important thing, but we have to build the kinds of relationships where trust is so strong that we can disagree and we can
Yeah.
stand up for what we know is best for our audience. But what is right? How do we know what to fight for and what to let go? And that to me requires a few different things. It requires a business mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So, what will the outcomes of this be? And what will the unintended consequences be? What's the cost? What's the return? We have to be able to think about things and speak the language of the business. It also requires us to use learning science and behavior change principles. So really thinking about how can we best structure these solutions so the business gets those outcomes. And then, Hannah, I don't usually talk about this, so you'll love this, but I think it also means knowing how to reach our audience or knowing who can reach our audience. We often in L&D, we launch things out into the world and hope for the best, but
Yep.
we need to actually do some of that research up front to understand our audience. We need to use that research to help us build the solutions, and then we need to use that research to help us market those solutions as well. And I feel like pretty much everything else we can compromise on. I mean, I'm sure I've forgotten something in that list. Those three are super important. They're super important
Absolutely.
parts of being a good partner and fighting only for those things that are really essential. I think, me personally, I think we spend too much time fighting and learning and development. We fight with our partners, we fight with each other, and I don't think that's what it looks like to be a good partner. So yes, fight, but only when it matters. And I think
Yeah.
when we can build those relationships based on trust, and we can speak the language of the business, when we can rely on learning science and behavior change principles, and we know our audience, then we're better able to do that, to be a good business partner.
And it really does come down to that trust and understanding the audience, right? When you were talking then, I was thinking, well, actually, if you think about a relationship, like not within work, like an actual relationship, a loving relationship, you do fight over things that matter. You do disagree over things that matter. You don't just say, like, no, I own everything, and pick fights for no reason. That's not a healthy relationship. So if we want to build healthy relationships with the wider business as an L&D professional, we need to work out what matters and what doesn't. And I think I have met a few L&Ders that are very precious about learning. Learning should all happen in our platforms, on our tools, and we should create it all. And actually, that's not conducive to us actually creating a really strong learning culture where people want to learn. And it's not conducive to letting people trust us and get to know us. So I think that's one of our biggest barriers as well, that perhaps maybe we need to lighten up a bit. And I say that as a marketer, and I've been called the brand police in the past, and I think I would struggle to let go. So I know it's easier said than done, but I think it's definitely something that L&Ders can learn from and really realise, actually, we can make a big impact here if we build a friendship and a partnership over just trying to be like, I'm L&D and I know everything.
Yeah. One of the things I've shared in the past is actually a piece of marriage advice, but I think it applies in this business partnering context as well. And it's, would you rather be right or in a relationship? And there are times when you need to be right, but
Yeah.
most of the time, it's better to be in a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we just need to let things go. Like, look, I've been married a year now. I feel like I've got a long way ahead of me, but I've learned a lot in the last year, and I'm sure my husband won't mind me saying that. Like, you do have to learn to just say, this doesn't really matter. We're still going to get to the same end goal. And I think that's the important point.
Yeah.
But like I said, this is easier said than done, isn't it? We can say like, oh, like let things go, partner with the business. But what does that mean in reality? If somebody came to you today, Heather, and said, Heather, I need an e-learning course on leadership training. It needs to be at least 30 minutes long and I need it by the end of the month. How would you react to that? And what would you say in reality?
I'm sure I have been told that exact thing. I think it is, again, leading with curiosity and not judgment on the request. So tell me a little bit more about this request. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes that you're looking for? And really just asking questions to better understand what they need. Once you have that, right, you can start to dig in a little bit to see, is e-learning the best option? Maybe, maybe not. Does it really need to be 30 minutes? Maybe, maybe not, right? And so we have to ask those questions and not just assume that that's not correct.
Absolutely. And if at that point when somebody says to you, okay, I want this, and you've said, actually, tell me a bit more, and you say, You know what? I think this will be better as a workshop. I think actually maybe you just need a support PDF for your leaders to read. How do you handle the pushback in that situation? Obviously, with everything you've already said, you've got a good relationship with these people, but I can imagine sometimes in organizations when somebody wants something from L&D, they want what they're asking for. So how do you handle that pushback?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is again kind of continuing to point back to the outcomes that they're looking for, figuring out where they have flexibility and where they don't, and also thinking about, is that 30-minute e-learning detrimental to those outcomes? Are there things that they can get in a 30-minute e-learning? Because maybe you give them, right, that 30-minute e-learning
Mm-hmm.
plus. Plus you give them that workshop, plus you give them whatever it is. And so if there are things that you can compromise on and it makes sense and it still supports the learning and it still supports the outcomes they're looking for, I think compromise can be a really great thing, because again, it helps build that relationship that you're saying, yes, like let's do that. Let's build that. And you know what? If you want to see that outcome, we also need to do these things. And usually the yes and is a much easier thing to agree to than no.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much do you think it's our role and responsibility to educate the wider business on almost learning principles? So, say in that example, when you're thinking, hey, a workshop would work really well here, how much responsibility and how much ownership do you take over actually saying, this is why?
I don't know how much our stakeholders care about learning science and other principles. I think that I do mention it when it makes sense to mention it. I do make sure that they know that it's based on something, right? And it's not just that I think my idea is better than theirs. But I don't think you have to have all of the research, all of the data. I don't think you have to point them to anything in particular, just more so like, hey, we know that to create behavior change, there's going to need to be some kind of prompt. So when they get back to their real life environment, right, their job, something's going to have to prompt them to do things differently. So how can we start to think about like building in that prompt? They don't need to know the whole story, right, to understand that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've even given more of like a personal example, something they can relate to versus the science behind it.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. Because I think oftentimes we might go a bit too far and try to explain a bit too much, and then people think, I just want the e learning course. Like, stop talking to me. I don't care. I've got a day job to do. So I think getting that balance right is really important. We need to know the theory. We need to understand the learning science and why it matters and why this should perform more efficiently for us or more effectively for us. But actually, our audience don't need to know that, do they? They just need to know what they need to know.
Yeah, I think it can be helpful to mention it if there is a disagreement, so they don't think you're just being argumentative, right? But they don't need all the details.
Yeah. So, what happens then when you're identifying these root cause of problems? So, somebody's come to you and said leadership, and you've realised actually it's a process problem, or actually maybe it's a middle manager problem. I don't know. You've kind of uncovered a few things that are pretty tricky in the organisation, which I know so many of our listeners find themselves doing. And then they think, ugh, well, they've asked for this. So how do I actually solve the problems that I've uncovered? What do? I need to prioritise and I need to focus. As a consultant to the business and maybe as an L&D business partner, if we want to call ourselves that, how do you handle actually helping the business? And of course, we know that we want to impact the business goals as well. How do we get people on our side, onto our strategy, onto what we want, what we need them to do to actually help the business hit its goals?
Oh, it's a great question. It's hard to answer out of context, like, thinking through an example. Um, I think we have to build that trust and we have to build that credibility. And that part of that means that we have to show our value We have to be able to talk about things that have gone well, whether that's through data or stories or whatever, right? We need to be able to show people that what we have done in the past works so that they're more likely to believe that what we're going to do in the future will work too. And
Yeah.
I think when you leverage that relationship and when you've built that trust and credibility, and there are things that you can point to say, hey, we did this before and it worked. That's when people start to come around.
And how much, in my opinion, it also comes down to actually asking them questions about themselves as well. Getting to know them, understanding them as human beings. At the end of the day, we're really talking about relationship building here. If your acquaintance said to you, I had an argument with my partner last night because he hadn't done the washing up, you might be like, oh, that's really annoying. He should have done the washing up. How dare he not help you? If your best friend said it to you, you'd know them more deeply. And I'm using this example. My best friend will never listen to this. I had this conversation recently that I said, well, actually, friend, did you tell him not to do it because he doesn't do it the way you like him to do it? And she was like, yeah, I did. So as a close friend, somebody that knows her very well, I gave a very different reaction to what she was telling me. And I think that goes for this business partnering as well. If somebody comes to you and goes, oh, I think they need leadership training, but actually you've been listening to them for the last 6 months complain about something else, you might be able to say, well, actually, no, I think it's this problem. Let me try help you in this way. Because you've built that relationship, you've gained that trust, and you actually know them. I think that's a really simple thing that is often overlooked in L&D circles. Actually knowing our audience, not just our learners, but actually the people within the business, other leaders, business functions, things that are going on. We have to know that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I leave time in my meetings just for kind of personal conversation, whether it's, how was your weekend? What's been going on? What else are you working on right now? How's that going? Just little things that give you insights into who they are and how they think and how they operate. You can, if you're really listening, right, you can kind of tell when somebody gets excited about something because their tone changes, the speed that they're talking changes, those kinds of things. And so you can really learn a lot about people by asking them questions outside of what you're working on. I think I've probably done podcast episodes on like how to run a training meeting, a training project meeting, but taking that time, it doesn't have to be significant, but taking that time actually does help build that personal relationship so that you are able to go back and say, well, actually, we talked about this before, and this was kind of what was going on. Are you still seeing that? And you're able to push back in a way that feels more comfortable because you've established that relationship.
Yeah, rather than that person in the team or in another team just disagreeing with you and you think, oh, well, they don't know what's actually going on. You've built that trust and that relationship that actually changes the narrative rather than just saying, yeah, okay, I don't agree with you. I'm the L&D professional. You have to listen to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're working in organisations and obviously you're building these relationships, I know some people listening to this podcast, and I know some of our listeners to other podcasts are like, oh, that makes sense in a small organisation. But what about me? I work with thousands of people. I can't possibly know them all. How would you handle it in a much bigger organisation where this request has come from a subject matter expert that perhaps doesn't have the time or inclination, like we've already said, to even care about the learning science? They just think a training needs to be done. How would we go about getting to the root cause of problems in a larger scale where actually talking to people is a little bit harder just because of the sheer volume?
Yeah. So I feel like as a consultant, right, this actually happens quite a bit because you're not embedded in the organization. So even if it's a smaller organization, you're not as close to the audience and like what's actually happening. So I think the same probably applies in the larger context as well. So I personally, I start my projects with kickoff meetings. So if you come and you say, we need a training, great. Let's start talking about it. And I start initially asking those questions of whoever it is that came to me, right? So whether it's the project sponsor or a subject matter expert or whatever, I ask questions to help understand what's actually going on. What are they seeing? What are they perceiving? And what are the outcomes that they're driving for? That's important. It's a piece of the puzzle. And then I've done it a couple of different ways as far as getting to the actual audience. I have asked, like, hey, I love what you're saying. I'd really love to better understand what this audience is experiencing on a daily basis. Can we do some virtual focus groups? Can we do some interviews? Something to just kind of get a better feeling, a better feel for what they're experiencing. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Another option that I've used is I've said, okay, I need you to go and ask these questions. Maybe I don't have access to that audience, but you do. And so here are some things I need you to talk to, whatever it is, 5 people, 7 people, depending on the scale, right? Like however many people, talk to this many people, ask them these questions, and then come back to me. So I've actually used them if I'm personally not able to get to that audience. I also think you don't need to interview 100 people, right? You get
Yep.
to a point where you're going to hear the same things over and over again. So really thinking about like what's the minimum um, investment that you need to make in that kind of research part of the process, and making sure that you get input from those things. You can also do observations. If you aren't able to really talk to people, can you visit where they're working and kind of watch what's happening and understand that? You could look at job descriptions potentially. That's a resource that exists that, sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not, but that's a resource that you can go through. If they're telling you they need to do something, you can kind of see, well, what else do they do on a regular basis? How does this fit with what they're doing on a regular basis? So I think there are other resources if you are in a larger organization and you just can't get to the main audience that you're looking at.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there with that. How many people do I need to speak to? So I get this a lot during our training program when we talk about research. I go, well, Hannah, how many people should I talk to? And I've kind of come up with this little rhythm that think about your audience size. Think of 10% of your audience. Do you think you could talk to 10% within a month? If you're thinking, absolutely not, no way, Jose, that's not going to work, reduce it to 5%. Is that more attainable? And just work out a number that works for you. If you're in a smaller organisation and you speak to 50 people, that might be a real substantial portion of your audience and give you real key insights. If you're in a huger organisation, so like some of the companies I've worked with are 340,000 plus employees, I think with that research project, I managed to talk to around 200 people. And it was still just a drop in the ocean because I had to talk to people in different geographies, in different areas, in different parts of the business. It really just does depend. There's no perfect answer, is there? Of this is how many people you should talk to understand the actual problems going on in the business.
Yep.
But the key thing you said that's really important is when you start noticing the patterns and the themes and people are repeating themselves time and time again, that's when we're going, okay, we've kind of spoken to enough people now that we're getting the recurring themes. This is what's really going on in the business.
Yeah, and you can also, if you feel like you really still need more input, once you start hearing those themes, you could put those in a survey too and send that out to more people. Suddenly you're validating kind of what you're hearing, what's showing up as those themes, and you're getting more input that would be harder for you to do one-on-one or even group conversations with.
Something's just come to my mind, and it's a big question. I think it's one that both of us are going to go, and think about answering. When we're looking for the root cause of a problem within a business that we are trying to help solve as an L&D practitioner, who should we be going to? Is it the employees, as in the learners? Is it the managers? Is it the person that requested the learning? Is it senior leaders? Who should we be looking at to really work out what on earth is going on in this business?
I would prefer to do all of those if that's an option. I
Yeah.
think, seeing it from different perspectives helps kind of fill in those gaps and helps you understand that context. So, understanding your subject matter expert or your stakeholder, whoever it is, they're coming to you for a reason. They're seeing something, there's some challenge, some pain point. So, understanding what they believe that to be is important, but then also talking to the people who are actually doing the thing. They might have a completely different challenge that's actually preventing them from, doing the behavior or whatever it is that you need. So, talking to them can be really important. And then I also think sometimes the supervisor, that manager can give you a lot of good insight too, as far as like how things work on the team and how people are motivated and, what the true gaps are.
Yeah. I actually have a really relevant example from a project I've just wrapped up. And I spoke to a ton of employees, and it was in a manufacturing kind of arm of the business. And a manager said to me, "Oh, my team don't have time to do that. I don't expect them to spend time searching the learning platform on the salary they're on. So I do it for them." So he was like streamlining the learning, finding the relevant content for them with like for them not doing it. So for us, they didn't log into the platform as often. Why were they unengaged? Actually, they wasn't. They just didn't have the time, but their manager was doing it for them. So he wasn't particularly engaged with his own learning. He was logging in to find learning for his team. So it just uncovered this narrative that we would never have seen from the data or from just talking to the employees. Having that layer of management in there really did make the difference. I think, in my personal opinion, the people I care least about is the senior leaders. And I think a quick conversation with them to understand why it's important. Where's the business going? What's happening? What's your 3-year, 5-year goal? How does the business need to support you in getting there? Beyond that, oftentimes when I've spoken to really senior leaders, their opinions are quite abstract and they're living in a different world. They're having a completely different experience to the people that are on the floor, so to speak. And they're not seeing the challenges that are really coming up. So they might say, "Oh, we need more learning content." People are saying that they can't find anything, so we need more content, for example. And actually, that's not what's going on in reality. So I think I agree with you that I'd want to talk to everybody. And I think that's really important to note that you need to be going out and doing that digging and that research to really go, okay, what's going on here? Like, I need to, like you said, at different angles. But also, we need to realise that as much as the senior leaders are the senior leaders, sometimes their views are quite abstract and are quite a little bit far away from what's the reality of an organisation.
Yeah, I think when it comes to actually creating like the behavior change or the new habit or whatever it is, they're not going to be as in tune with what's happening on a daily basis. Um, that said, I think they're essential if there's an organizational change that is happening at the same time. And that's a lot of times I've found anyway, when I'm being brought in, there's some other change that is happening that is kind of driving this need for whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so, like to your point, having those conversations with them about what's driving the request, what outcomes are you hoping for, where is the organization headed, even parameters sometimes can be really important because then we need them and their influence and their buy-in as you think about the organizational change.
Absolutely. And do you ever think, if you've had that conversation with a senior leader and you've got essentially your learning strategy down, you know what you want to focus on within the next year to help the business hit its goals, and then you get an inbound request that doesn't quite fit in, do you think there's ever a time and a place that you say, actually, this isn't one for the L&D team? Or do you think that we should be picking up almost everything that comes our way?
No, I mean, I don't know that I have a black and white answer to that, but I think that it's about being able to have the conversation of if this is a priority, this new thing, we can make it a priority, but here are the like implications of that. right? And maybe this other thing that we thought was a priority isn't going to get done. Are you okay with that? Being able to have those conversations, because there is only so much time
Yep.
in a day. And so knowing that, like, yes, you're bringing this priority, it wasn't on our list. If this is truly a priority, we can make this happen, but something's going to have to give.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes back to our kind of firefighting mentality, really, of we need to just solve the problem as it comes in. So if a request comes in, we do it because it's easier than having that conversation.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody listening to this that's very much in that firefighting mode to start moving towards what we've been discussing today, of actually having those deeper conversations and relationships to get to the root cause, to develop something that actually really works?
Yeah, I think so much of it comes down to the relationship. I think that's the biggest thing that you could do right now, right? Is make sure that you have opportunities to build relationships with the people around you, your stakeholders, your subject matter experts, the other business partners, right, that are at the table. You have to have those relationships. You have to have trust. You have to have credibility, and I think that's something that you could start today.
And practically, how would you go about building those relationships? If somebody's sitting there thinking, like, oh, I'm so busy,
Yeah.
what do I have to do? Do I have to go to the work social because I really don't want to go to the bar at the weekend? Like, how would you go about building those relationships?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I have a couple of podcast episodes on that topic, and one I did recently, I think, sums it up well. We often talk about building trust and credibility, being a good partner, and we talk about it as a list of tasks, things that we need to
Mm-hmm.
do. But I think it's really about who we are and how we show up. And so on this last podcast episode, I talked about three things related to how we show up. One is responsibility, one is commitment, and one is care. And I think with responsibility, right, it's we aren't just creating a solution and handing it over. We're co-creating, we're adjusting, we're building together. It's not my way or the highway. We're both responsible for the outcome, me and whoever I'm working with, right? So I think adjusting how we um, approach projects can be one piece of that.
Yeah,
I think commitment is important. We need to be dependable and accountable for our work and for the partnership. We have to follow through on our promises, and our partners have to know they can rely on us. So, again, those are
absolutely.
things that we can do right now. And then care, I think this is about the kind of the softer side of the relationship. So, we need to prioritize the relationship itself. We need to speak truth, but with care. So when we do have to fight, when we do have to disagree, we have to do so with care. And we need to be really seeking to offer clarity and not control, because it's not about being right. It's about providing that clarity of here's where we need to go and why. And I think those three things really help us build that trust and that credibility with our partners. And that we can do in the context of work. That does not require us to do anything extra or go to the happy hour or whatever, that
Yeah.
if you do it in a way that feels natural and good to you, but we can do that in project meetings. We can do that in hallways. We can do that on Slack, right? These are things that are just more about how we show up and how we interact with people on a regular basis.
I absolutely love that. And actually, I feel like I've stolen my final question that I've started asking everybody at the end of this series of what is the one thing you would get an L&D practitioner to do after listening to this? Would that one thing be focusing on their relationship building and how to actually get to the root cause of these problems?
Well, that's a good question. The relationships are so important. I think, oh, I'm torn. I'm torn. Okay. I think yes, relationship, but I also think um asking good questions would be at my
Okay.
list too, just because and part of that is how you build a relationship, right? How do you get to know someone? Asking good
Absolutely.
questions.
They go hand in hand.
So yeah, I think you have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You can't make assumptions. And that applies both to your audience, but also to those other business partners that you're working with, because that relationship is so essential.
Absolutely. And I've got a feeling you've probably got a resource on this, but what makes a good question? How do you know that you're asking the right questions?
I mean, that's a great question in and of itself. I personally like open-ended questions. I think it gets people talking a little bit more. I do try to avoid the why question. I don't know if the data still says that people are defensive to why questions or not. I feel like some of that is always changing, but in the past, they've said that why questions can make people feel defensive. So instead of saying, "Why do you want that?" Tell me more about that. What are you hoping that will do for you? So kind of framing our questions in a way that are open, they invite conversation, they invite longer responses, and don't feel judgmental to the other person.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of fostering the really comfortable situation, you can essentially answer the why question and just reword it
Yeah,
and word it in a different way, and you still get the same answers out. So
absolutely.
I completely agree with that. Although I do, still throw in a why question every now and again,
It's
but I'm a maverick. I do what I fancy.
it's hard to avoid the why questions completely, and sometimes it's hard to say them in a way that isn't, kind of, like, short and judgy sounding, right? Because sometimes you hear
Yeah.
things and you're like, "But why?" But, like, for the most part for the most part, I think we can reframe it and we can, "Tell me more."
And I think that's like a real case in point. There is no script. We're human beings talking to human beings at the end of the day. We are building human relationships. Be natural, be human. Don't try to read off a script. Don't try to be like, whoa, an academic journal told me I should ask these 7 questions. Just go in with a really open mind. And like you said, I think maybe that skill of curiosity
Yep,
is something that needs to come out in these conversations if we ever want to get to the root cause. And truly, by getting to the root cause, align with what the business really needs, rather than just being seen as a content powerhouse, which I think a lot of L&Ders are still in that position, aren't they?
absolutely. We are not training factories, we are change agents, and so we have to show up like that.
Absolutely love that. We are not training factories, we are change agents. I think that's the title of the podcast locked in. I absolutely love that. So, is there anything else on this topic of getting to the root cause of problems, or actually developing learning that really matters and works, that you really wanted to share with the audience? Because as I'm sure you know, this audience ranges from heads of learnings to L&D practitioners just getting into the role, all thinking about how they can shift their mindset. So is there any other words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think it's okay. You only have to do the next right thing. I think sometimes when we think about learning and learning strategy and understanding our audience and what are we going to create and this has to be done by this time frame and it has to meet this outcome, it can feel overwhelming. We only have to do the next right thing. And I think if we can focus on that, you can always iterate. You can always adapt. If it doesn't achieve the outcome you're looking for, you can learn from that and just do the next right thing, whatever that is.
I absolutely love that. And I use that so often. And the final part you said there of like, we can learn from it. If it doesn't work, it's okay. When we're talking about doing marketing, because people are so scared of putting out a post that's slightly different. I'm like, nothing bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's just give it a go and learn from it. We are learning professionals. We should be comfortable with learning through experimentation. And like you said, just doing the next right thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that, Heather. I've absolutely loved this conversation. I'm sure there are so many more topics that we can talk on together. But as you know, this is part of the People Impact Loop. And I'm sure everything you've said today is really going to help people start thinking about that real deep discovery, not just asking the surface level questions, that real deep investigation. It will scope a lot of learning strategies and make people do the right thing, the next right thing. So thank you so much for joining us, Heather.
Thank you.
I've absolutely loved having you here and I hope to have you back again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.